It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Welcome to a new week. It's so good to have you joining us on the Happy Families Podcast. Last week, we got a bit carried away. I had 6 stories lined up for this week. You're not joining me.
This week in parenting.
Oh, that is so cheesy. I can't believe we're doing this. This week in parenting, it's one of my favourite episodes of the podcast. And Kylie, I really thought we'd get through 6 stories last week. You're shaking your head as you look at me.
This is my life, Pete.
I've always had 2 rules for life. I was asked what my life philosophy was years and years and years ago. And I said, 2 things. Number 1, always bite off more than you can chew. And number 2, make it up as you go along. And I think it served us reasonably well. You have less to say on this than I do. So last week we bit off more than we could chew, and today we're continuing to make it up as we go along because I bit off more than we could chew. Kylie, the 3 stories that we covered off last week were really valuable, really, really curious, and I think get people talking. We talked about Roblox and the hellscape that it's created for kids because it allows pedophiles in and allows them to contact kids en masse. We also talked about how parenting is bad for your health, according to the US Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, and Meta passing the buck when it comes to who's responsible for keeping kids safe online. You can go back and have a listen to that episode from last Thursday. However, today we have the other 3 stories, and you can guide us through them, because I am going to get carried away. But I think you'll have something to say about these ones as well. So let's go. Where do you want to start?
There was an article recently published in the Forbes magazine suggested that there is a correlation between smartphone use and anxiety in our kids.
Right. But here's the fascinating thing. The research, 2020 research study from Pew Research showed that 68% of American parents with a child younger than 17 years of age said that their smartphones routinely distract them during interactions with their children. Here's what this new research says. And by the way, do you want to congratulate me on getting some doctor's desk material into This Week in Parenting? Do you like that?
You're so bad.
Sneaking it in. New research, the JAMA Network Open journal. Researcher Sherry Madigan of the University of Calgary and her colleagues found this. In early childhood, parental technoference, that is when parents are on devices, not kids, when parents are on devices and it's interfering, parental technoference is associated with decreases in parental-child engagement, which is obvious, right? I mean, University of Durr could have told you that. But they found that reduced ability to notice and attend to children's needs, less frequent, lower quality joint play and conversational turns, more negative responses to children's behaviour, and higher risk of child injury all occur when parents are on their devices too much. They also added in adolescence, adolescent perceived parental technoference is associated with higher levels of parent-child conflict and lower levels of parental emotional support and warmth. In other words, when we are on our devices, it's causing problems. But this is where this story really takes on a life of its own. I think it's really important. They went deeper. They recruited 1,300 emerging adolescents aged 9 to 11. And the mums and the kids were asked to complete a series of questionnaires. Some of the questions that the kids answered included, I wish my parent would spend less time on their phone and other devices, and I get frustrated with my parent for being on their phone or other devices when we're spending time together. And then the kids also self-reported any symptoms they're experiencing related to anxiety and depression and attention difficulties and hyperactivity. And what the research found was this: when the children perceived their parents were indulging in more technoference, those kids experienced higher mental health difficulties.
So in the article, did it acknowledge anything outside of anxiety, or was anxiety the main focus?
Let me give you a direct quote. They said, technoference is becoming a pervasive part of parent-child interactions, and a growing literature suggests that technology-based interferences have mental health ramifications. Higher levels of perceived parental technoference were associated with higher levels of emerging adolescent inattention and hyperactivity symptoms. In other words, the more you're on your phone, the greater the possibility that your child will either be inattentive themselves or hyperactive. There were no gender differences. And here's the other finding that really, I guess, grabbed me. Emerging adolescents with anxiety may also be more sensitive to their parents' technoference than emerging adolescents with lower levels of anxiety, which means that if your kid is a bit anxious and you're on your device, they're probably going to perceive that there is more technoference than there actually is, and that's going to drive greater anxiety. I think this is, I just think it's one of those articles, one of those news stories. I guess it's a doctor's desk as well. I did cheat a little bit, but it's one of those things that is supposed to make you stop and go, can I be more intentional when I'm using my device?
Well, I think that the reality is that we obviously are all doing life, for the most part, the best we can. I actually had our 17-year-old pull me up the other day because she walked into the house while I was in the middle of doing an email at the table, and she said, "Hi, Mum." And I mumbled hi back to her, but I didn't lift my eyes.
Technoference at its best.
She walked past me, went to the bathroom. She came back and she said, "Mum, I just came in and said hello to you and you completely ignored me." And I said, "I didn't. I said hello." But her perception was I hadn't, because I literally hadn't moved my gaze from what I was doing.
Yeah, because communication is more than just the mumbling of a word.
Yeah. And I guess the biggest challenge we have is if we were to stop doing what we're doing every time we had a child interrupt us. For many parents, we wouldn't get through our day's task list.
I get that. A lot of parents will say that. And yet what I have found is when I stop and give my child the attention that they are seeking, when I meet their eyes, when I give them a hug, when I listen to them for a minute or two as they tell me their thing, then they're really content because they've felt seen and heard and valued. They're content to walk away with a smile on their face and go, I feel loved, and now I feel secure and I can go and do my thing. And paradoxically, I find that I get more time, more focus, more attention by being available than I would if I was to continually fold them off and say, "I'll be with you soon, I'll be with you soon, I'll be with you soon." Different point of view, a different way of looking at it, but certainly that's been my experience. Let's go to story number 2.
Now, a review into the future of Victoria's inter-school sporting program is underway, aiming to shift the focus away from year-round team sports and competitions, things like football and rowing, and instead focus more on things like yoga and pilates.
A recent article suggests that Victorian private schools are ditching footy for yoga.
When I read this, initially, everything about me just went, what is going on with the world? But stay with me for just a sec, okay? So this was written by Susie O'Brien in the Herald Sun. Susie O'Brien's one of my favourite and most fun reporters at the Herald Sun, and she said this: Victoria's most elite schools are moving away from year-round competitive sports like football and rowing in favour of walking, yoga and Pilates. Doesn't it make you feel so relaxed? I mean, I feel like we need this soundtrack all the way through the rest of the podcast. No more rowing, no more football. Let's go for a walk and stretch our bodies. Do you know what I mean? Do you like that?
I have 2 thoughts around this. I have often thought about the different sports that our kids involve themselves in high school or in school in general. And the biggest acknowledgement I have is they spent all this energy and time in this space for a handful of years, and then they leave school and they never do it again.
Never play that sport again.
And
not like cycling. They should get the kids on the velodrome, should get the kids on the road bike, because they can ride bikes for the rest of their lives. We can get mammals started young.
And I think...
You're ignoring me.
I can't believe you said mammals. And I think that there's obviously so much goodness that comes from moving our bodies and team sports and all of the things that come with it.
They should be surfing.
But I have also thought about the fact that they spent all of this time building up a skill set that they never use again.
Yeah.
And so that's one train of thought. So
okay.
I actually I love the idea of schools taking up this space and acknowledging that these are practices that if we can get the children into from an early age, they can actually practice this style of mindfulness for their entire lives.
Well, it's not actually a style of
life.
Yeah, it's not a style
for their entire life.
It's not a style of mindfulness. It's a fitness. It's a lifestyle, right? It's a way of approaching health.
But it is mindfulness because when
it's much more sustainable.
That's exactly right.
Right.
But I'm going around in circles.
Well, we're not going to get to the third one. You realise that, don't you? This Week in Parenting is going to go
But
all
I don't
week.
think it can come at the expense and the exclusion of team sports. When I think about the challenges that we have in the classrooms as it is, because children are not allowed to move their bodies enough,
And they're not learning to cooperate enough because there's so much solitary work.
it breaks my heart to think that these sports would be excluded from curriculums entirely.
Curricula, even. I'm sorry. So let me add a couple of things here because I was thinking about it. The Herald Sun reveals that APS schools will continue compulsory Saturday morning sport for senior school students, but with a renewed focus on less competitive contact team sports. And I think this is cultural. Number one, there's a move away from competition. Okay. But number two, they said a growing number of enrollments from Asian and Indian families is understood to be a factor in the move. So what we're dealing with is not just culture in terms of parents are less inclined to push their children into competitive pursuits, that culture, but also the culture of the Australian sporting culture is being shifted as families with alternative cultural sporting backgrounds start to make their way into these schools and into these environments. And you've got, I guess, Indian families and you've got Asian families who are saying, you know, we're not into AFL. Or we're not into rowing. They're not our sport. We prefer swimming or we prefer whatever it is. And so they're starting to shift. I think this is fascinating, but something that really troubles me about it is this from a Haileybury source who is anonymous saying that schools are less and less interested in Saturday sport and more interested in maintaining academic results.
Yeah, and that's what I'm concerned about as well. This idea that we're kind of almost leaning towards a very sedentary and academic-based learning at the expense of so much. There's just so much at expense.
You use the word expense, though, and I guess it's also worth highlighting. Melbourne Grammar Principal Philip Grutzner told the Herald Sun the logistics of providing a meaningful sporting experience for so many students on a weekly basis across 3 seasons are enormous, just huge costs. When you look at all the kids that are involved, it's over 26,000 students. The costs to organise the fields, the uniforms, the personnel, the players, the transport, the equipment, blah, 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 blah. Huge costs. But I guess the tricky thing is this stuff's so healthy for kids. They need to be involved in moving their bodies. They need to have healthy lifestyles. And if it's getting dropped in because it costs a lot of money and it's getting dropped because kids might not have as much time to study, I think we're heading in the wrong direction. So that's This Week in Parenting. There is one more news story, but guess what?
You can't cut it there. We've got one more story left.
Okay, look, we've got to do this one like in 90 seconds.
I think we can.
Okay, go.
Well, nearly 45,000 Aussie kids are registered for homeschooling, with more and more parents now choosing the unconventional route.
An article recently suggested that homeschooling in Queensland is booming.
Yeah, this one is worth talking about. And the main reason that we should talk about it is because on Wednesday, I'm talking with Brett Compton. Brett is the CEO of Yuka. Yuka is a homeschool organisation that provides curriculum. There's no sponsorship here. There's no entanglement at all. But our kids actually use Yuka as their curriculum. And I thought it's the only one that I've heard of because that's what we're using. And I've contacted him and said, can we talk about it because of this story? So here's the story in a nutshell. In Queensland, homeschooling enrolments have reached a record high, according to the Courier Mail, as parents desperate to protect their children from bullying abandon traditional education facilities. At-home learning enrolments have soared by 229% over the past 5 years. So in 2019, 0.03% of Queensland students homeschooled. Today, it's about 1.5% of the state's 880,000 students. That's the equivalent of one student missing from every third Queensland classroom, and the numbers are only going up. We're going to be talking about the reasons that that's happening, but this particular Courier Mail article was basically all about the bullying. It was the bullying. Our kids are out of school for that and other reasons, and we're homeschooling 2 of them. But this is something that is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and more parents that we talk to say, how do you do it? And I'm really interested in it, and how feasible is it? So that's This Week in Parenting. We'll talk to Brett more on Wednesday to get the lowdown on what's really going on with homeschooling across Australia.
Well, it's been a big 2 weeks.
For this week
We've
in
had to
parenting.
stretch it out,
I know.
but we got there.
I think we should do it more often because I get too carried away. And some of these stories are fascinating. Like we could do entire episodes on these stories. There's so much going on for parents to wrap their heads around. Thanks so much for listening. We hope that it's been really useful for you. Tomorrow, we're going to have a conversation about whether birth order is legit or not. All that research that says that if you're the firstborn, you're this, and if you're the lastborn, you're that, middle child syndrome, all that kind of thing.
I think it's real.
Do you really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll unpack that. You can ask me all the questions because we're going to dive into the data and talk about what the research says about birth order. That's tomorrow on the Happy Families podcast, which is produced by Justin Rowland from Bridge Media. If you would like more info about making your family happier, love for you to jump online at happyfamilies.com.au, especially if you're raising an autistic kiddo. We have a brand new course that is launching, that's about to happen, actually. You can get all the details at happyfamilies.com.au or on our social media platforms. Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families.